This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly top three, the top three things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of February 24th, 2025. The weekly top three is a regular segment on the Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our three issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly top three also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top three issues are these. First, we discussed the Senate Finance Committee's proposed SB 109, which, if enacted, would be the largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history. Second, we explain why the state's problem isn't either too much spending or too little revenue, it's the wrong revenue structure. And third, we explain why, if you look, you can see the forces behind the state's next big spending wave starting to form already. And now, let's join Michael.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
You know, Michael, I was coming off a great week. I had a couple of concerts. I went to a concert with a group that I've loved for years and years and years. I'm in Chicago. I went to a concert in Boston. I was really feeling great. And then this morning, I look at the bills that got filed yesterday, and I think the introduction that you use of steaming is appropriate for me this morning.
Yeah, there's some boy, I tell you what, and they're finally saying the quiet part out loud, and I hate to say I told you so, but dang it, listeners, I told you so. I mean, they're using some of the language that we talked about here. We'll get into that with Brad Keithley, but let's get started in number one, shall we? The largest individual tax increase in Alaska history. That's what it's all about, Brad. Let's get started.
Well, this segment was originally going to start out to talk about what's going on the House side with the PFD. And it was going to focus on, the segment was going to focus on the change in language we're seeing on the House side with respect to the PFD. Those who were around will remember that the whole thing with the PFD started in, the whole flippy floppy with the PFD started in 2017 when the Legislative Finance Division changed a footnote or changed their treatment of a footnote in the way they do the fiscal summary that flipped the PFD from designated general funds, which means it's set off for a statutory purpose, to unrestricted general funds, which means it's, open season, use it for whatever you want to use. And that change in language, the change in language from designated general fund to unrestricted general fund, had a huge impact. It then justified the Senate saying, well, it's unrestricted general funds. Leg Finance tells us so. Although they had told Leg Finance to tell them that, but Leg Finance tells us so. It's unrestricted general funds, so we can use it for whatever we want. We're going to use it for this, that, and the other thing. And PFD, that sort of comes last. Then the language shifted to percentages. We were going to have a 50-50 PFD, or some people said we were going to have a 33. I think the Republicans on House Finance one year tried a 33-67 PFD, a third of the POMB draw. And then it went to a 25-75 PFD. But it was always about percentages. A share of the Alaskans would get through the PFD, be distributed through the PFD, a share of what's ever being taken from the POM, from the percent of market value draw from the permanent fund earnings. Now the House is trying to change the House. Andy Josephson, call a name a name. Andy Josephson is trying to change the language again to start talking about dollar amounts. No longer percentages. We're going to give you $1,000 PFD. And boy, aren't you happy that you're getting $1,000 PFD?
You're lucky. You're lucky.
And what that's doing is shifting the language away from the percentages. And you can, I did a cheat sheet that people can go online to the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page or Twitter page or whatever and find it. But I did a cheat sheet, and the $1,000 PFD is an 8317 PFD. But they don't want to say 8317, or they don't want to say 8020, or they don't want to say 8515. They want to start putting it now in terms of dollar amounts and say, boy, aren't you lucky? And anyway, that's what this segment was going to be about. But late last night, when I read the newspaper, Sean McGuire's newspaper, on a new bill that got dropped yesterday, and then read the bill this morning, this segment changed. What's happened is that the Senate Finance Committee has introduced SB 109, which in fact is the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history. It changes the statute from the traditional POMV statute that's been in there since the early 1980s, changes it permanently to 2575, to POMV 2575, except it doesn't even do that, because it changes the language also from the shall distribute that's in the existing language, which the legislature's ignored and the governor's signed bills ignoring. But it changes the language in the statute from shall distribute to may. And it doesn't even clear up what some claim to be this conflict that's in the existing statute now because of the POMV statute being superimposed on top of the PFD statute. It doesn't even clear up the conflict that some claim that there's an ambiguity or there's a conflict in the statute between the amount the legislature can take for general fund for UGF purposes and the amount that's set aside for the PFD. It keeps that conflict inside the statute. So Bert Stedman can continue to say, oh, well, there's a conflict in the statute, so we have to decide. It doesn't even insure 2575. Even if it insured 2575, it would be the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history by far. But it doesn't even insure 2575. All right, here's the part that just I blew off the planet. My mind exploded that so far that I blew off the planet on. Here's the part that really set me over the edge. The co-sponsors of the bill include not only the members of the Senate majority, but they include Mike Cronk and James Kaufman from the Senate minority, who are co-sponsors from the Senate minority, who are co-sponsors to the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history. I mean, what the hell? Why do we have a Senate minority if they're just going to roll over and go with the Senate majority on the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history? There isn't even an effort in this bill, although I understand from Sean McGuire's article there may be more bills coming at the end of the week, but there isn't an effort in this bill even to have a comprehensive plan. You know, at times we've talked about, okay, if we've got to adopt changes in the PFD, let's at least make it part of a comprehensive effort. That was the entire goal of the 2021 Legislative Fiscal Policy Working Group that Ben Carpenter and Shelley Hughes sat on, to have a comprehensive plan that included changes in the PFD, but also more equitable revenues if we needed additional revenues, changes to the old tax code, a spending cap, and putting the PFD in the Constitution. A comprehensive plan. There isn't even an effort in this bill, and there's no companion bills to it. There isn't even an effort in this bill to have a comprehensive plan. So what we have is, one more time, the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history that the Senate minority members
have
in the legislature are signing off on.
Well, the Senate minority members in the Finance Committee, just to be clear, because I got clarification from Rob Myers, who said this is not the minority's position. This is these two individuals. But
It's
at
the
the same,
two individuals the minority put on Senate Finance. It's
yeah,
two of the five.
two of 5 or 6, yeah. The problem is, of course, and just for clarification, so everybody knows what Brad's talking about, they're talking about changing the foundational statute for the PFD. It would no longer be a 5-year rolling average of the 21%, yada, yada, yada. They basically would calculate it at the end of the year every year and just say, here's what's left over. It would, here's what it is. It's $1,000 and we're taking everything else. And again, this is, we've said, if you want to ignore the statute, you might as well change the statute. So they're going to change it. But I was definitely not expecting this to be part of the change that they came down with, especially from, again, I'm surprised even if it's not the majority or the minority's position, it's not the caucus's position. I'm still surprised that 2 members of the caucus are out there supporting this. It really kind of blows my mind.
So the minority caucus appoints 2 members to the Finance Committee. Those are the caucus's representatives on the Finance Committee. Those are supposed to be the caucus's voice on the Finance Committee. Are you telling me, or is someone trying to tell us that they went rogue? that they've gone off, that Kronk and Kaufman are off in their own universe now? I don't believe that. They were appointed by the minority. That is the minority on the Finance Committee. And if someone's trying to tell us that somehow there's a different caucus position, or that's not the caucus position, or whatever, I'm not there for that. I'm not believing that. It is after all the effort that's gone into focusing on a comprehensive plan, after all the effort that we've talked about in terms of the impact of PFD cuts on Alaska families, in terms of the adverse impact of PFD cuts on the overall Alaska economy, after all the effort to have the 2 minority, Burt Lyman, okay, Keel, Kelly Merrick, okay, yeah, I'm sort of expecting that, but I cannot comprehend the fact that the 2 minority members have rolled into this. Co-sponsors. There's no asterisks. There's no, we agree to some, but we disagree as to others. Co-sponsors right up there, equal with Lyman and Stedman. I just think it's beyond the edge for me.
The best part is the headline for this article from Sean McGuire. Senate panel introduces 75-25 PFD formula amid doubts about affordability. They don't even know if that's affordable. As you pointed out, the $1,000 PFD is an 8317. And we already know that Ledge Finance said that they did all the spending, just the general spending and the increases and everything else. We're talking about 90-something% of the POMV draw to pay for it all. It's madness. There is just no stopping it at this point.
But that is the point. There are no breaks. If the Senate minority members are in on this deal, if the Senate minority has now gone in on 75-25, and it's not even, let's be clear, it's not even 75-25. It's sort of a goal of 75-25, may appropriate 25%. Remember this whole debate we had at one point about shall versus may? Well, they've given up on that too.
Yeah,
It is. There's no break anymore. It's just everybody now is pushing right ahead.
Yeah, they're not even trying. They're not even trying to throw the brakes on or slow things down. They're just like, okay, here we go. They've taken out the word distribute. Distribution. There's no distribution now. It's just they may appropriate it. As you said, they're no longer taking out the shall transfer. They could decide at any time. It's just, it's astonishing. All right.
Single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history and the 2 Senate minority members are signed on to it.
Yep. Brad, you should really tell us how you feel about this, because it's just, I mean, look, I expected at some point we were going to have this discussion about the permanent fund formula, right? The statutory formula. I expected that we were going to have it, but I expected that it would be, kind of a full caucus coming together saying, look, let's propose something that kind of protects it or enshrines it or does something, or, even if it was just some kind of political grandstanding. I expected them to take some kind of stand on it in that direction. Instead, for it to come out of House Finance and basically say, oh yeah, we're going to take it all apart and everything else, and there is no shell transfer, and there's no more distribution. It's just appropriation, and yada yada yada. I mean, I'm just like, wow, they have just not only given up, they're going with the full flow at this point.
They're becoming part of the steamroller. I mean,
yeah.
So the big things that Ben and Shelley fought for in the legislative finance, or the legislative working group, fiscal policy working group, big things were comprehensive plan. If you're going to change the PFD, do it in conjunction with the Constitution, with constitutionalizing the PFD, so we don't keep going through this every year. Do it in conjunction with the spending cap or some sort of restraint on spending. Do it in conjunction with some broader revenue measures, so you get everybody involved in the game, including non-residents, the top 20% in the oil companies, and do it as part of a comprehensive plan. That has been the key to talking about how we're going to unlock, or how we're going to deal with the PFD, to have this comprehensive plan. There's nothing. So what did the Senate minority member, if we want to play this game, it's not really the caucus, it's only the Senate minority members on. So what did the Senate minority members get out of this? Nada. They just gave up. They just why do we vote for the Senate minority? I mean, they just gave up. They just became part of the steamroller. There's no indication that they got anything in terms of a comprehensive plan in exchange for giving up on the PFD. And they just opened the door to 75-25, maybe, if we feel like it in any given year. This is by statute. At least we have a statutory argument now, but now the statutory argument is going to be, well, the statute says we can do whatever we want to, so we're going to do what we want to.
Yeah.
And just keep taking it more and more and more. What did the Senate minority members get for signing onto this bill? Nothing. They got nothing. They got nothing in terms of a comprehensive plan. They got nothing in terms of constitutional protection. They got nothing in terms of making at least the 75-25 definitive. They got nothing. I can keep going.
No, I'm actually just reading the language of the bill, because it used to read, at the end of each fiscal year, the corporation shall transfer from the earnings reserve account to the dividend fund established under this statute a percent of the income available for distribution. And now it says, at each fiscal year, the legislature may appropriate from the earnings reserve to the general fund the amount available for appropriation calculated under this statute to fund the dividend established under the 25% of income available for appropriation. It's just, it may, it's not even a shall distribute. So that's the thing. They say, well, now we're putting the 25-75. No, it says may right there. They may do it. They may decide not to do it. It's not a shall. You don't even have the argument of shall distribute or shall transfer. Now it's, they may appropriate, which was how they were treating it anyway. But now you've taken out any
statutory protection. It is a permanent. I mean, that's why I'm heavy hitting the word permanent when it's the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history. We've had the largest annual increase in Alaska's history since 2017 as a result of these appropriation cuts. But this is the permanent.
Angie said, just because it's a committee bill doesn't mean that all the members agree, but they signed on to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a committee bill, Angie. Read it. It has co-sponsors, named co-sponsors, and Kronk and Kaufman are named co-sponsors.
All right, hold on. How's Kronk going to explain this to his rural district? That's what I want to know. Okay, we just peeled Brad off the ceiling, and so hopefully we're going to... He's just a little. The problem is the revenue structure, is what Brad says. Now, my argument has always been, because it always used to be, Brad, I remember this 25 years ago. They'd be like, oh, no, the state doesn't have a spending problem. The state's got a revenue problem. It's the real problem. And I'm thinking, well, wait, this is a chicken and the egg argument. You have a spending, you've got revenue, coming out you got revenue coming out your wahoo here. I mean, you're just spending more than you take in. So you have a spending problem that's creating the revenue problem. And it's gone on so long that now you have both, in my opinion. But you said it's a revenue structural problem. Hit me with this here on the way in.
All right, so this is a takeoff on a op-ed that Bruce Tangeman has, the former Department of Revenue Commissioner Bruce Tangeman has written. It's now showing up in several publications. The title of it is, does Alaska have a revenue problem or a spending problem? And basically Tangeman says a little bit of both. And in the process of explaining why he says that, he blows through the PFD and just treats that as part of spending and saying, well, we just need to keep reducing the PFD, and that's how we'll solve this. And then we need to do something like zero-based budgeting to address the spending problem. In all honesty, not a very helpful article, but it does set up this issue. Does Alaska have a revenue problem or a spending problem? Here's why I say it's a revenue structure problem. And SB 109 is the perfect setup for this conversation. What we have is a legislature who is probing for the weakest link in terms of where they can find additional revenue. PFD cuts are additional revenue. They aren't cuts in spending. Every economist that has looked at this issue in the 2016 studies, the 2017 studies, the 2021 or the 2021 study that ITEP did, they've all treated PFD cuts as revenue because that's what it is. It's a diversion of revenue, of additional revenue into the UGF by diverting a portion of the revenue that's supposed to be going to individual Alaska families. And so what the legislature has done all the way along is look for the weakest link, the revenue source that has the least support, and then they just gone in and they probed that. Now, to date, it's been the PFD, because PFD cuts really only affect middle and lower income Alaska families. They take some money. Yes, they take some money from the top 20%, but as a share of income, it's a trivial amount. And the top 20% are more than happy to give up that portion of their PFD in order to avoid taxes. But the legislatures looked for the weakest link. If instead of giving them the PFD, which really hits only middle and lower income Alaska families, if we had a revenue structure that said everybody's going to pay the same proportionate share, or oil companies, you're going to pay a proportionate share, or non-resident industries like tourism and fishing, you're going to pay a proportionate share of the cost. If we had a broad-based tax that hit everybody equally, didn't focus the entire burden on middle and lower income Alaska families, but had hit everybody equally, we would have had a broad-based pushback on additional spending. The top 20% would have said, wait, you're going to raise my taxes to do what? No, thanks. We're not going to have additional spending. You're not going to raise my taxes to do that. The oil companies would have said, wait, you're going to increase our taxes to do that? No, thanks. They would have because they were going to pay a share of it. They would have pushed back on spending and held spending down. They would have, that's the donor class. They would have pushed back on their legislators and say, don't do that because you're going to increase the taxes on me, if we had been paying for this through a broad-based tax. But we haven't done that. Instead, we've done it through PFD cuts, a very narrow, economically narrow tax that hones in just on middle and lower income Alaska families, the weakest in terms of being able to push back, don't have lobbyists down there, don't have the time, mom and pop don't have the time to follow all this stuff in detail. The weakest link in the chain, and so they continue doing it. And that's what, SB 109 proves that. They're just continuing to go suck the revenue out of out of the PFD through PFD cuts, suck the revenue out of middle and lower income Alaska families, and the rest of the population, the rest of the stakeholders in the state, the old companies, the industries that are dependent on non-residents, and the top 20%, the rest of them are just sitting there going, it's not affecting us, so why? Sometimes you get lip service from some people about oh, well, we shouldn't be spending more, but they're not using their resources, their abilities, their ties to legislators to push back because it doesn't affect them. And as long as they can keep sucking the PFD dry, as long as they can keep building additional spending by sucking down the PFD, focusing it on middle and lower income Alaska families, the top 20% oil companies, non-residents aren't going to push back, because if they do, somebody's going to say, well, let's just tax them then. If they're going to start into this conversation, let's tax them also. So they're acquiescing to the increase in spending. So to me, the problem, this isn't a revenue problem. It isn't a spending problem. It's a revenue structure problem, because we've allowed the legislature to find a weak link in the chain and just blow through that in terms of additional spending. And you're right, it's a push-pull, Michael. I mean, you're right. Once you have that much spending, then you start having a revenue problem behind it. But the reason we have a spending problem in the first place, the reason we go down this road in the first place, is because we have a revenue structure problem that has not captured all of Alaskans in pushing back and being affected by, and thus in pushing back on spending.
I mean, this is and this is a big deal here. Tangeman actually again says some of the quiet parts out loud. I had to laugh. He said, because exactly what did we say for years? That, boy, it's been a nice, it's been a free ride. The free rides die hard, buckle up, sugar lips, here it comes. And he even says it on the expenditure side. Alaska's been fortunate that for much of the past 50 years, our expenses have basically been 100% covered by taxes and royalties paid for the industry. But free rides die hard. Essentially, he's already saying it. There's going to have to be a tax. And he flat out says it. There's going to have to be a tax some way down the road. And that's what we've been talking about. There is, and in Tangeman, to his credit, says the same thing. It's, the spending is largely unaffected. There is nothing has stopped them from continuing to spend.
Because there hasn't been pushback, because they found a way to target the weakest link, to target middle and lower income Alaska families, the ones without lobbyists, the ones without trade associations, the ones without, the ability to go down to Juneau, the ones without without the the information flow that all the other segments of the population get. They've been able to target that segment, and so the rest of the segments, the top 20%, the oil companies, the non-resident industries, just sat around going, "Oh, lucky us." We continue to get free government. I mean, think about the childcare, right? Childcare affects a lot of upper middle income Alaska families that have, dual incomes, have the wife working and the husband working, have children at home. And oh my gosh, childcare is expensive. We want somebody to help cover the cost of childcare. We don't want to pay for it. So let's just go to PFD cuts. Let's take money out of the hands of middle and lower income Alaska families and use it to pay for our childcare, which is essentially what that bill is, either whether it's through a tax credit that Julie Colombe's done or whether it's direct subsidies that Zach Fields wants to do. It is taking money out of middle and lower income Alaska families to pay for the childcare of the top 20%. And it's just, it has been revenue structure all along. It has been the failure to broad base the hit, the cost, the discomfort from the increased spending, to broad base that and make everybody pay a share. It's been that failure that's resulted in additional spending, out of control spending, and sucking up, the need for additional revenue to follow along. I swear to God, if we had paid, I know this to a certainty, if we had paid, if we had required the oil companies to pay for the increased spending through adjustments to oil taxes, those spending increases never, ever, ever would have happened.
Right. No.
The oil companies would have come down like a ton of bricks on the legislature.
They got the big lobbying stick. They would have been beating them down on that. And I want to clear something up here because there's been some comments here in the chat room that I think encapsulate probably what some of the listeners think out there. Randy says, I think people should push back against Brad's tax increase proposals. We need to stop the gestation of an income tax. Fat Ray over on YouTube says, yeah, let's do that revenue structure thing so I can add taxes to the list of reasons why I'm leaving. Willing to bet I wouldn't be alone. You don't understand. Taxes are coming.
Taxes are here, Michael.
Well, I mean, let's just set aside the argument about the PFD being a tax. Okay, just for a second. I agree with you. It is a tax. Matt Berman, the ICER professor, says it is the effective a tax. It's the ICER said it would be the largest tax. I mean, let's set that aside. Everybody is saying now, every legislature, when you look at it and they start talking about revenue, they all talk about taxes. They are coming. And this is what you and I have been saying for 10 years. We're not saying we are fans of taxes. We're not saying that we love taxes. We're saying we better start talking about the type of tax we want because it is coming. And if we don't start talking about it and we keep ignoring it, they're going to shove the worst form of tax down our throat that could possibly happen. I'm getting pissed now because this is what I'm trying to explain for 10 years. I don't want a tax. But this is where we're going. And if we just ignore it and go, la, 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 I'm not talking about taxes, they are going to stuff one right down our throats that will be the worst tax that we could possibly imagine because it's easiest for them and worse for us. That's just what's going to happen.
Yep.
Taxes are coming, people. It's inevitable.
And that's Michael, if we would have done that in 2014, we would have done that in 2015 and said, look, if we're going to increase spending, if we're going to continue to grow these deficits, we're going to pay for it with a broad-based tax. We never would have had those deficits. If we would have said, oil companies, you're going to have to pay more if we continue this spending. Top 20%, Natasha, you're going to have to pay more if we continue this spending. Non-resident industries, fish, tourism, you're going to have to pay more if we continue this spending. It never would have happened. We're not talking about creating taxes for more revenues. We're talking about creating taxes, a broad-based tax, to act as a disincentive, as an incentive to push back on spending. We're talking about motivating people who have power, political power, to push back on spending. You don't want taxes, and that's the advantage of taxes. You don't want them, so people push back on additional spending that create them. We haven't done that. They found the weak link in the fence. They found the way to direct the cost to middle and lower income Alaska families. And once they found that weak link in the fence, they just kept going. If we would have said in the early 20 teens, if we would have said in the middle 20 teens, if we would have said in the late 20 teens, if we would have said in the early 2020s, we're going to pay for this on a broad-based basis with top 20% non-resident industries and the oil companies paying a proportionate share, spending would have stopped.
Yeah.
But we didn't. We kept letting him take the PFD. So the problem isn't not enough revenue the problem isn't we didn't structure the revenue right. And as a result of that, spending has continued to grow because they found a way to get the revenue to fund that spending in a way that they didn't get hard pushback.
Well, and I will say this before we go, because this is it right here. We're coming up on it. They have leveraged the Republicans' risk adversity to even discussing taxes. That's how they've done it. They leveraged the aversion to taxes to where they just basically say, well, you don't want a tax, do you? And that's what they do. They say, they drop that bomb and then they walk out of the room and the Republicans spin and go, well, no, of course we don't want a tax. Nobody even wants to talk about a tax. I mean, again, Brian says it here in the chat room. It's not that Brad, who's advocating for taxes, he is and has been the guy who's been warning that taxes are coming. that we've been talking about this on this program for years, that taxes are coming, and that we should have a discussion that if they are coming and if they are inevitable, which has been both of our positions for the last 10 years, then we should at least have a say in making sure that the tax that we have is the most equitable and has the biggest potential for holding back the size and scope of state growth in government. This is where we've been. But they've used that, oh, you don't want taxes, do you? Okay, that shuts up the conversation. You don't want taxes, do you? That's what it's about.
And then they keep growing government by taking additional PFD cuts. They hone in on the weakest link. They don't stop growing government. They just continue growing government by honing in on the weakest link. I mean, in all fairness, Randy Griffin is the biggest ally that Andy Josephson has. Because Andy Josephson wants you to keep focused on PFDs because he knows there isn't enough political support to push back on spending if he can keep using PFDs. And when Randy says, "Oh, take PFDs, yeah, don't do that. You go ahead and do that. Don't have taxes." He's playing right into Andy Josephson's hands.
This whole thing is so frustrating because now we're seeing it. And that's the thing. Every time we talk to, this is the dichotomy where they would say, do you want taxes or a PFD? Well, that's a false choice. I mean, that's but that's how they've been doing it. Do you want taxes or do you want well, you want taxes? Well, then let us do this. And people go, oh, okay, yeah, take the PFD. I don't need the PFD. Meanwhile, people in the lower income brackets are going, wait, that's like kind of, propping us up. But everybody's else like, just don't tax us, whatever you do. It's like we've been avoiding it for so long. When it finally does come here, it's going to be a shock to the system.
And that's the way, and that has enabled what's coming, Michael, because they've used the don't tax us, use the PFD to build spending to a level that now that almost to a level that the PFD can't support. Cutting the PFD can't support anymore. But they've got spending up at that level. They've got everybody invested in spending at that level. They've got constituencies built around that level. And so they're going to say, oh, well, now we need taxes to support that level of spending. If we had stopped it back in the early 20-teens, mid 20-teens, late 20-teens, early 2020s, if we'd stopped it by saying, look, everybody's going to have to pay a proportionate share of whatever additional spending there is, that would have stopped it. But we allowed them by all this crud about no taxes, use the PFD, no taxes. We allowed it by all this crud of allowing them to use the PFD to build up spending to a level that we're now going to get stuck with taxes paying for.
Right.
It is revenue structure. We have done it to ourselves through revenue structure. It's not spending. It's not revenue. It's revenue structure. We allowed them to target the weakest link in the fence and to build spending all around that. And now it's going to spread. Well,
and I've said it for years. If we don't take a stand, as people were going, oh, take the PFD, just don't tax us. I kept saying, you don't understand. If you don't take a stand now, they're going to take the PFD and then they're going to tax you. So you'll be double losers. That's where right now we're all double losers because they're going to take the whole PFD and then there's going to be a tax structure on top of it. You've done nothing. So Brandy said something about, well, we want to avoid the pain. We want it to be as far down the road as possible. We don't want it. That's not the way to go about it. You can't be like, oh, we just want to put it off as long as possible, because that will make it worse if we don't. Just because Kathy Giesel says that income tax is coming does not mean we have to rush it. It's coming. And we should not want to rush it. You're right. We don't want it. But if we don't deal with it, it's going to be worse than ever. It's the double indemnity.
That's the very reason that we're going to have taxes. It's the very reason that we're going to have taxes, because we enable them to build up spending through using PFD cuts. If in the early 20-teens, the mid 20-teens, the late 20-teens, we would have said, nope, no more spending without broad-based taxes. Would have stopped it. We never would have gotten to this point where we're going to lose the PFD and have taxes on top of it. We never would have gotten there had we said broad-based taxes, because it would have stopped it at that point. The oil companies would have said, nope, we're not paying for anymore. Top 20% would have said, nope, we're not paying for anymore. Non-resident industries would have said, nope, we're not paying anymore.
Anthony said, I don't disagree that taxes are coming and or necessary. What I'm saying is that those net increases, absent of an overall reduction of cost of living and resources, is going to accelerate, not decelerate, the conditions required to collapse our economy and drive our population out. Drive out the population that can leave and force the ones who can't to be tethered to more and more government assistance and create even more drain on the hemorrhage economy we're operating. The doom loop. We talked about that. He's not wrong.
No. And the way to stop it was to have had broad-based taxes so everybody pushed back. I'm saying this not as a historical matter, but we're at it again. We're going to cross 75-25. Let's say 75-25. Let's say that is the line now. We're just going to stand on that line. Forget about 50-50. Forget about the statute. We're going to stand on 75-25. Well, we're about to cross that. And the question is, are we going to let them cross that and use it out of PFD cuts and build additional spending because they can build it on the weakest link revenue source? We're going to let them do that. Or are we going to stand and say, no, you want any further increase beyond 75-25, you got to do it through broad-based taxes. And yeah. I swear to you, to a certainty, that if the oil companies think they're going to get stuck with paying for part of this, there will be no increased spending.
Right. No. And yeah, the doom loop thing that we've talked about in the past is there's a finite pool to be able to tax from. And if you tax them, some of them will leave, which will force that same amount of tax to be on a smaller pool, which in turn will force another cadre to leave, which will shrink it even more. That is the doom loop. And that's what we're approaching right now. It's a self-reinforcing negative spiral is what it is. All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Boy, I was all kind of just sanguine and stuff at the beginning too, and now Brad's got me all spun up. Let's get to number 3.
I forgot what number 3 was.
Yeah. Oh, look, the next state cost wave is building. What is the next state cost wave? I mean, I don't even know if you want to go into this one, Brad, because I mean, this is such a, look, you and I just feel like it's Groundhog Day, right? Every Tuesday for 10 years, it's Groundhog Day. We talk about the same things. We point out the same things in different ways with different examples and different things. But you and I have been crying the same song and trumpeting the same problems for 10 years. And yet people still, they get hung up. Oh, well, you guys want taxes. That's not what we said. Oh, you guys want, again, it's not what we've been doing is we are trying to tell you that this is what's coming. And the last 2 years, they've all been saying the quiet part out loud that this is what now they're admitting this is they're saying it. They're telegraphing that it's coming. And people are like, oh, no, well, no, we're just no. And, at some point, Brad and I will be like, we told you so. Not that will feel great because we will still be, we'll be subject to the consequences as well as everybody else. It's best to be able to tell you, I told you so when you're standing outside of the consequences. But here we are. All right, Brad, I'll let you go and get into it, whatever you want to.
Well, it's relevant. I mean, that discussion, the discussion of the first 2 segments is relevant to the third segment. The third segment is you can see the next cost wave, the next spending wave coming. There's just all sorts of headlines about it. In the Juneau Empire, there's about 100,000 Alaskans could lose health insurance under GOP plan backed by Trump. Hospital officials say. And it's probably not inaccurate in terms of its impact. Union expects at least 1,378 Alaska federal employees in probationary status to be fired. And you see headline after headline about what the receding federal presence in Alaska is going to do to the Alaska economy. And so you sit there and go, well, are these people going to take it? Are these people just going to say, okay, well, I guess the federal government isn't going to do it anymore, so we got to go find other jobs? Hell no. They're going to start coming to the state. I mean, part of the impact, part of the reason, or part of the impact of the 100,000 Alaskans could lose health insurance will go right back into the loop we had when Walker was thinking about Medicaid expansion, which was the hospitals are losing money because they're not being reimbursed by the federal government for the poor patients who come into the hospitals. that they cannot refuse to see. The hospitals will be losing money, and so they'll say, "Oh, we need more money." Well, in the case of Medicaid expansion, what Walker did was say, "Okay, we'll do Medicaid expansion. That'll get us more federal money, and so we'll solve your problem that way." Well, if we've got reductions in Medicaid as a result of federal recession, as a result of the federal government leaving the field, so to speak, and uncovering this problem again, hospitals aren't going to say, "Okay, well, I guess we're just going to make less money." Hospitals are going to say, "We're going to go to the state and ask the state to step up." Part of what the Medicaid reductions are going to be, part of it is going to be taking people off the rolls of Medicaid. But part of it, the federal government can easily say, "We're going to fund less. We're going to reduce the percent of Medicaid that we pay. We're going to leave Medicaid in place. We're going to leave it as a shell in place. People will be able to claim Medicaid, but we're going to reduce the federal contribution to covering the cost."
Which leaves the state on the hook, right?
Guess who picks up the bill for that? You can see the next wave of costs coming. And if we say, we'll fund it through additional PFD cuts, or we'll fund it through, hugely regressive sales taxes that focus in on middle and lower income Alaska families, if we do it that way, we're going to be in the same shape 5 years from now that we are already. I mean, which is we're spending's increasing, and we're not able to stop it. It has not worked, folks. Focus on this. Since we started talking about in the early 2010s, it has not worked to say no. Just say no to spending. We've said that. We've said that over and over and over. Don't increase spending. It has not worked. And if you think it's going to start working magically now by us just saying no, middle and lower income Alaska families saying no, then you're just ignoring the last 10 years of history. We've got to address it. We've got to address it through changing the incentives. We've got to change it by broadening the base of people saying no. The top 20% haven't said no. The oil companies haven't said no to increased spending. In fact, they've been some of the advocates of increased spending. Ooh, more child care for our employees. Goody. Yeah, we can do that. The oil companies haven't said no to increased spending. The non-resident industries haven't said no to increased spending. They've all been in favor of increased spending because they didn't have to pay for it. If we change the incentives so that they get stuck with part of the bill, they will start saying no also. It hasn't worked for us just to say no. Anyway, the next cost wave is coming. It's coming in terms of as the federal government recedes, we think, oh, good, we'll get the federal government to reduce spending, and so we'll solve the federal problem. It's going to be at the expense of increased pressure on the state legislature to increase state spending to offset that. Medicaid's the best example of that, but it's going to show up in a bunch of other places as well. And you can see it coming with these headlines.
Well, the good news is the federal government is cutting back because they're in the same boat that the state is. They don't have the money anymore. They're going to be cutting back. But the bad news is that you have constituencies for those programs, whatever they are, whether they're medical or something else, and they're going to look to the state immediately to fill that gap. And so there's going to be more pressure on the state to spend more, even though they have less money than the federal government in the long run. That's the bottom line. Is it too little, too late, Brad? I mean, if we decided, let's just say that we took over we pod peopled all the folks in the legislature, and they were like, "We'll do what you say, master," or whatever you say. And we said, okay, it's got to be something broad-based. It's got to be, the revenue's got to change. We got to structurally change it where everybody's got a piece of the pie. Everybody's got to share, throw something in the pot. Do you think that do we have enough time? I mean, is it even feasible at this point?
Well, that's two questions. One, is it feasible to get that passed? Not with Randy and others saying, "Oh, we don't want that."
Right.
It's not feasible to get it passed if they still get sucked in by the Andy Josephsons of the world to support their focus on the single source, the weakest link in the chain. Can we get it passed? I think, we keep talking about it. I have to hope that we can get a broad-based protection passed. If we got it passed, would it work? Yes. If you've got the oil companies engaged, if you've got Ralph Samuels and the non-resident industries engaged, if you've got Natasha von Imhoff and the others in the top 20% engaged in pushing back on spending, yes, we will stop spending. So it's not a question of, is it too late to stop spending? No, you can stop spending. But to do it, you have to broaden the hit so that there's an incentive for others to push back. You and I saying, as we've demonstrated over the last 10 years, you and I and Randy saying no, don't increase spending hasn't worked. There's just too many people out there. And as long as they, wanting funding from government.
Oh, there's the whole election cycle was an example of that. It was nothing but more spending, the whole election cycle.
And as long as they can get it from the weakest link in the chain, they'll continue to do it. So we won't stop spending if we don't create incentives for everybody to push back. If we continue to go down this road of it's only middle and lower income Alaska families that get hit, so everybody else doesn't care, or in fact they favor it because who doesn't like childcare? Who doesn't like free childcare? Employers, corporations. If we don't do that, if we don't broaden it out, spending will continue. We'll lose. We'll just keep going down this road. If we're able to broaden it out so the coalition pushing back is broad-based, then yeah, we'll stop spending. It's that simple.
It's that simple. It's really, Brad just laid it out. It's that simple. But again, there is no political will to cut, folks. Even those people in the legislature that want to cut, they are a minority of the minority. That's what's really coming out here. I mean, we saw that in 2018, 2019, right? Even when the governor had the ability, when he could have, he may not have been overridden in his vetoes, we had members of the minority that crossed the aisle and went ahead and would vote because they didn't want their piece of the pie cut. Everybody's got to feel the pain. Everybody's got to do it. And nobody is willing to do it. There is no political will to cut.
There will be political will to cut if the donor class, the oil companies, and the non-resident industries push back. There will be the political will to cut because they will pressure their representatives, the ones they help put in office,
right,
to cut, to stop it if they're going to have to pay for it.
But they have they have no skin in the game right now.
Right. There won't be the political will if the only ones raising the issue are the ones being affected, middle and lower income Alaska families, the ones being affected.
Yeah.
So it's changing. Maybe another way to think about it is changing the political will, changing the scope of people pushing back, changing the people pushing back on the legislators, creating the incentive so that we have a broad base pushing back as opposed to just this narrow weak link in the fence.
And Willie nails it. Willie nails it when we were talking about if we don't start talking about this, they're going to give us the worst form of tax ever. He said, you could bet your ass that the income tax bill will have a cap for taxes at $200,000. The top 20% aren't going to pay an equal proportional share for their spending. That's what we've been talking about. That if you wait around and keep ignoring it and we can't have to then they'll put something in like this that has a cap on the top 20%. And the rest of the state will still pay the bill and they'll still want spending because their constituencies and their contractors and their, hey, it's fine with me.
We've already seen that. We've already seen that with the so-called income tax bills that Zach Fields and Elise Galvin put in. They were very narrowly drawn bills that generated a very little bit of revenue. They could say that they had had an income tax, and they could say that they were trying to get a contribution from the top 20%, but they were very narrowly drawn. The bulk of it still came from PFD cuts. And you're exactly right. Willie's exactly right. It'll be drawn in a way to protect those interests. If we don't insist, if Randy doesn't insist on everybody having skin in the game, then Randy's going to be the one that gets hit the hardest out of this.
Yeah. I love it. Randy said early on, I agree. Michael Dukes is right. There is an excessive spending problem. And yet right now he comes back and says, please don't tax us workers so you can give out more free money on the PFD. You're missing the point. You are missing
As I tell you, Randy is Andy Josephson's biggest ally.
Yeah.
Randy and Andy are right there together.
Well, because there's a whole bunch of people out there who are like that on the right. Oh, well, I don't care about the PFD, just take it. And again, yes, they're going to take it, and then they're going to tax you on top of it because you were avoiding talking about taxes. They'll hit you with the hardest one that they can find. Brad, 60 seconds. Summate today's wonderful program for us all the way through here.
People are giving up. I mean, SB 109 is the co-sponsors on SB 109 is the single most disappointing thing I've seen in the last 10 years. The minority members, the Senate minority members, the very ones that we're counting on to say no, have given up, and they listed themselves as co-sponsors on the single largest permanent individual tax increase in Alaska's history. Sad day.
Maybe we should vote harder, Brad. Maybe that's what we should do. We should vote harder and make it work. It's just, I don't know how to fix this. I really don't. I know that it's coming, and if we don't have a voice in how this is working, if we don't have a voice in how we are taxed, then we're going to get the worst possible outcome, and it will affect us and not the people who are benefiting from it in many ways. All right, Brad, thank you so much for coming on board and joining us. We appreciate it.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the Weekly Top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week for the next edition of the Weekly Top 3.